Hey, welcome back to At the Desk. This is Ken McConnell. Today I'm going to be talking about my newest novel that I just released a few weeks ago. Its name is Betweos. See it over my shoulder here, cover. It is not set in the Star Saga universe, so I thought I should talk a little bit about it and introduce you to it. Um, so indulge me here, a little bit of advertising, and I'll talk about how it got started, how long it's taken me to write it, um, how it was a screenplay at one time, and all the difficulties of the different drafts that I had to write to include a complete rewrite, all the way to the final draft. Um, so sit back and enjoy the story, a little story about a story. So the idea for Betweos came to me when I was still living with my parents. I have a brother who's a couple years younger than me. His name is Byron, and one evening he came into my room and sat down and said, "I have an idea for a story." And I said, lay it on me. I love stories. It wasn't necessarily a writing at that time, but always loved stories. So I said, tell me your story. And he told me the outline of what was to become Betweos. And I asked him, that's pretty deep. That's pretty complex. There's a lot of stuff in that story. Who are we going to get to write it? And he said, well, he thought it was a would make a good screenplay. And actually, the way he originally conceived it, he thought it would be two movies. And this is pre-internet days, just dating myself here. This is like in the 80s, mid 80s, when he came up with this idea. And at the time, he thought it would be cool to have a sci-fi war story where you saw the same a different character on each side of the conflict, and you got to engage with that character and understand why that character is fighting in this sci-fi war. And so it's essentially two points of view. And he thought it would be cool if it was basically two movies, like one from each side's point of view. And that was a running theme in the story from then on. So we kind of hashed out some details, and I wasn't really a writer at the time, but I knew that it was really complex and it was going to need a lot of work. So we kind of workshopped it amongst ourselves, basically, for off and on for several years. Every time we got together, every time we got on a phone call, we would talk about it. And the story kind of evolved at that point. And later on, many years later, I was attending film school at the University of Central Florida, and I needed a screenplay. So I wrote lots of screenplays in my screenwriting class. And one of the ones that I started to write was Betweos. I think originally the name for it that we came up with was called True Colors. And if you've read the story, you may have noticed that there's a lot of attention to detail when it comes to colors between the two planets that are at war. And that's no coincidence. So True Colors was a good first start title. Um, but I eventually wrote it as a screenplay outside of class and kind of let one of my friends read it, and he read it and he said, it's got a lot of action, it's very military, it's very, cool in that respect, but I don't think it has much of a heart, as a story. I can't relate to the characters that much, blah blah blah. Typical, early story creation from someone who's not a writer. um so I worked on the story some more and thought about it, and time passed, many decades passed. And eventually I decided to become a novelist, at least as a hobby, and I started writing novels. And that was when I started writing the Star Saga with the novel Star Strikers. And even after I did that, I didn't think I was anywhere good enough to handle the Betweos plot, as it were. And so I said, well, maybe someday we'll write it as a book and I'll publish it that way. Um, but I'm not good enough to do that at this point. So I went on to write lots and lots of novels in the Star Saga. I probably had 12, 14 different novels under my belt by the time I came back to Betweos and told my brother, hey, remember that story you came to me, Betweos? I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually try to write that as a novel instead of a screenplay. and it'll be one novel. And he's like, oh, good luck with that. And so um, I spent a lot of time hashing out plot details, and it it's a complicated plot, but it's also a back and forth plot, and it takes a lot of planning to execute something like that and have it be able to pull it off successfully. So my first few attempts were kind of ragged. I basically reinterpreted the screenplay as a novel and then went from there and changed a lot of things. Went back on the phone with my brother again many times to say, hey, how about we change this to that and change this character's name or whatever, and how, move things around. And he was pretty, I mean, he doesn't know any more about writing than I did. At this point, I knew a lot more than he did. But I just wanted to make sure that the story was something that, he still liked and we both still liked. So he was pretty good natured about that. And eventually I worked out a first draft of the novel and showed it to some people as beta readers, and most of them kind of didn't really understand where I was going for. Um, and when pressed to tell me, okay, what is it that you don't understand, or where do you get lost? Things like these are very good questions to ask any beta reader, right? And a lot of them just couldn't relate to the characters, and they were both male characters, and they're both, in a war, and it's a serious topic, and it's also very relatable to many guys who've grown up wanting to be in a war movie or going off to war and fighting an enemy. Um, so it's relatable in that aspect, but as far as a personal journey, it wasn't that relatable. And after a lot of serious thought and consideration about it, I decided, you know what it needs? It needs to be written in first person. So it's a 300 some odd page novel. And now I was telling myself, okay, you're not done yet. You need to rewrite the entire thing from first person. And because you have two main characters, you must have two completely unique personalities to write first person from, so that the audience doesn't get too just, jarred when you switch chapters between the two. So that was hard, but also not too hard, because a lot of their inner voice of the character came from the situation the character was in, and who the character was in the story. So that was pretty well defined. So it was, I'm not going to say it was super easy, but it was a lot easier than I thought it would be to make them distinguishable. Basically, one character wanted to go to war and another character did not. So that at its root, that's different right there. So I took that as my lead and rewrote the entire novel, page one rewrite. Took me quite a while, most of a year to do that. And it wasn't just changing the tenses and the, all that. It was actually rewriting parts, because when you go first person, you realize you can't show certain things. So you had to recraft scenes or move scenes around so that you only see what the main character sees. You don't see what they don't see, which makes sense. But when you're trying to compose a story that's very, very elaborate and there's a lot of stuff going on, many layers, as it were, that can get complicated. So it took me a while to do that. But once I finished the rewrite and had it from two very distinctive points of view, test read with some beta readers after that, and they all kind of got it at that point. Okay, we like the story a lot now because we understand it, and it's relatable, which is very important detail. Your main character should be relatable. So both the main characters were relatable at that point, and that's when it started to come together. And this would be late last year. I had some people proofread it and edit it for me, and they found issues, as everyone always does. And so some last minute issues were resolved about just maybe how it ended, or some clarification of a few scenes, and all the P's and Q's were dotted and all that. So everything was as good as we could make it. Um, and that's when I decided to go ahead and publish it, and that turned out to be January of this year. So it's fresh out of, out of the on the marketplace. It is available at all ebook uh, vendors. So if you have a favorite vendor, you should be able to find it if you search for either the unique name Betweos or my name, Ken McConnell, and it'll come up. And please take a look at it. Let me know what you think of it. Leave reviews wherever you purchased it. Let me know how you think of it. I'm very excited to finally have it out, and so that it has can develop an audience, hopefully. Um, and that's the story of Betweos. I can't really go into a whole lot of details without being spoiler, so I won't. But after a year or so, I will probably do some spoilers on that book to see if we can generate some interest in it, because it is. I describe it as being a cross between 1984, Starship Troopers, and All Quiet on the Western Front. Kind of twist all those stories together, you have something very similar to Betweos. Plus, it has a very high concept premise to begin with, which is I haven't seen before, so it's unique. So give it a shot if you like, and let me know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know any way you can if you liked it or just didn't like it. And we'll see you next time at the desk.